The moment Brad slams the front door behind me on my 67th birthday, his words still ringing in my ears like a death sentence. "You're useless, Donte. You have no place in our home anymore." My suitcase sits heavy in my hand as I stand on the sidewalk in the evening darkness, watching my daughter Sarah's silhouette disappear from the living room window. 23 years I spent raising her after her mother died young. Now she won't even look at me as her husband throws me out like yesterday's garbage. 6 months earlier, everything looked different. I remember the day I had to make the phone call to Sarah, my voice shaking as I explained that the medical bills from Margaret's cancer treatment had finally caught up with me. The house we'd lived in for 32 years was gone, swallowed up by debt I couldn't escape no matter how many extra shifts I worked at the bank. Sarah's voice was gentle when she offered me a place to stay. "Dad, you know you're always welcome here. It's just temporary until you get back on your feet." Her husband Brad had grunted something that might have been agreement in the background, but I should have paid more attention to the reluctance in his tone. Their suburban Denver home was a modest 2-story, with a small yard where my grandson Tommy played with his action figures. Sarah worked part-time as a dental hygienist, while Brad managed what he claimed was a busy auto parts store downtown. From the moment I moved into their converted basement room, I could sense the financial tension hanging over the household like storm clouds. Bills sat unopened on their kitchen counter. I'd catch fragments of hushed arguments between Sarah and Brad about overdue payments and maxed-out credit cards. Sarah started skipping lunch at work, claiming she wasn't hungry, but I recognized the signs of a family stretching every dollar. Brad would snap at Tommy for asking for new school supplies or a Happy Meal, his face tight with stress. Without telling anyone, I started making anonymous online payments to their utility companies and grocery stores. Margaret's life insurance money was sitting in my account, money I'd planned to use for a small apartment eventually. But watching my daughter worry about keeping the lights on while trying to raise my grandson broke something inside me. Every month, I'd transfer money to cover their electric bill, their water bill, their car payments. I used different payment methods and never left traces they could follow back to me. At first, Brad seemed to tolerate my presence reasonably well. He'd nod when I offered to help with household repairs or volunteer to drive Tommy to soccer practice. He even cracked a few jokes during dinner, making Sarah smile in a way I hadn't seen since her mother died. I thought maybe we could build something resembling a family relationship. But as weeks turned into months, I noticed changes in Brad's behavior. He'd roll his eyes when I made my coffee at 6 in the morning, muttering about old man schedules disrupting his routine. When I played classical music softly while reading in the living room, he'd turn on the television louder than necessary, claiming he couldn't hear his shows. Small acts of consideration on my part somehow became sources of irritation for him. The breaking point should have been obvious when I fixed their leaking kitchen faucet one Saturday morning. I'd noticed Sarah putting a bowl underneath it for weeks, and the constant dripping was driving me crazy. It was a simple washer replacement, something I'd done hundreds of times in my own house. But when Brad came downstairs and saw me tightening the final connection, his face darkened. "Who told you to mess with my plumbing?" he demanded, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "I was just trying to help," I said, confused by his anger. The drip was getting worse, and I had the right tools in my toolbox. "This is my house, Donte. My responsibility. I don't need you playing handyman and making me look incompetent in front of my family." Sarah tried to smooth things over, thanking me for the repair while assuring Brad that nobody thought less of him for accepting help. But I could see something had shifted. In Brad's mind, every helpful gesture I made was somehow an attack on his role as the man of the house. The real revelation came on a Thursday afternoon when Brad asked me to clean his car as a birthday surprise for Sarah. I was happy to help, thinking this might be an opportunity to rebuild our relationship. But while vacuuming the interior, I found gambling receipts stuffed into the door pockets and under the seats. Casino visits, poker tournaments, online betting confirmations printed out and crumpled up. The dates went back months, and the amounts made my stomach turn. Hundreds of dollars lost in single evenings. Thousands of dollars gambled away over the span of our time living together. One receipt showed a $1,500 loss from just 3 days earlier. But the worst discovery was a notice from his employer, the auto parts store, terminating his employment for theft of inventory. The date was 3 weeks old, meaning he'd been lying to Sarah about going to work every day since then. He was leaving the house each morning, pretending to go to his job, while actually spending his days gambling away money they didn't have. Everything suddenly made sense. The financial stress, the unpaid bills, the arguments about money. It wasn't bad luck or a tight economy causing their problems. It was Brad's gambling addiction and criminal behavior, destroying their family's security while he accepted my anonymous help to cover his tracks. I carefully photographed the receipts and the termination notice with my phone, my hands trembling as I realized how deep this deception ran. Then I put everything back exactly where I found it, finished cleaning the car, and went inside to think about what I'd discovered. That evening, Brad came home and thanked me for cleaning his car, acting like the loving husband and father Sarah believed him to be. He kissed her cheek, asked Tommy about his homework, and complained about his difficult day at work with such convincing sincerity that I almost doubted what I'd found. But watching him lie so effortlessly to my daughter's face, knowing that my secret financial support was enabling him to hide his gambling losses and job loss, made me realize I'd been part of the problem. My good intentions were actually helping a man destroy my daughter's life. The next few weeks became a careful dance of observation and growing dread. I started paying attention to Brad's patterns, tracking when he left the house and when he returned. His work schedule made no sense for someone supposedly managing a busy auto parts store. Some days he'd leave at 10 in the morning and come home at 3 in the afternoon, claiming he'd worked a full shift. Other days he'd disappear for hours without explanation, returning home agitated and short-tempered. My attempts to contribute positively to the household began backfiring in ways I couldn't have predicted. When I offered to drive Tommy to school one morning because Sarah was running late for a dental conference, Brad accused me of undermining his authority as the father. When I suggested we all go to a movie together, he claimed I was trying to control their family time. Every gesture of kindness or helpfulness somehow became evidence of my interference in his domain. The tension escalated when I made the mistake of offering to help Brad fix their lawnmower. The engine was smoking and making horrible noises, and I could see he was getting frustrated trying to diagnose the problem. I'd worked on small engines for decades and knew it was probably just a dirty carburetor. "I've got this handled," Brad snapped when I approached with my toolbox. "I just thought I could take a look," I said. "Sometimes fresh eyes can spot things." "Fresh eyes?" His voice rose sharply. "You think I'm too stupid to fix my own equipment?" "That's not what I meant at all. I was just offering to help." "Well, I don't need your help, Donte. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of my own property and my own family without assistance from someone who couldn't even hang on to his own house." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah, who had been watching from the kitchen window, came outside immediately. "Brad, that was uncalled for," she said, her voice strained. "Dad was just trying to be helpful." "Helpful?" Brad laughed bitterly. "He's been here 6 months, Sarah. 6 months of him hovering around, fixing things I didn't ask him to fix, making suggestions I didn't ask for, acting like this is his house instead of mine." I could see Sarah torn between defending me and avoiding conflict with her husband. The position I'd put her in by staying with them was becoming unbearable for everyone involved, but not for the reasons she understood. That night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom, voices rising despite their obvious attempts to keep the conversation private. Brad's voice carried through the thin walls as he talked about boundaries and respect and how I was making him feel like a guest in his own home. Sarah's responses were quieter, more diplomatic, but I could hear the exhaustion in her tone. The real breakthrough in my investigation came when I decided to drive past Brad's former workplace, the auto parts store where he claimed to still be employed. I told Sarah I was going to the library downtown, which wasn't entirely a lie since I planned to stop there afterward. The store manager, a friendly woman named Helen, recognized me when I introduced myself as Brad's father-in-law. Her expression immediately became uncomfortable. "Oh," she said, glancing around as if checking who might be listening. "I'm sorry, but Brad doesn't work here anymore. We had to let him go about a month ago." "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Sarah mentioned there might be some changes at work. Was it a layoff situation? Helen's discomfort increased. "I probably shouldn't discuss the details, but it wasn't a layoff. There were some inventory discrepancies, and we had to involve our loss prevention team. I really can't say more than that." I thanked her and left, my worst suspicions confirmed. Brad hadn't just been gambling. He'd been stealing from his employer, probably to finance his gambling habit or cover his losses. The inventory discrepancies Helen mentioned were almost certainly theft charges that could have resulted in criminal prosecution. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot and tried to process what this meant for Sarah and Tommy. My daughter had no idea her husband was a gambling addict and a thief. She believed their financial struggles were temporary setbacks that would improve when the economy got better or when Brad got a promotion. She had no idea that dangerous people might come looking for gambling debts, or that her husband's criminal behavior could destroy her career in healthcare if it became public. The most painful realization was that my anonymous financial support had been enabling Brad to maintain his deception. By secretly paying their bills, I'd given him the freedom to gamble away his income without facing immediate consequences. Sarah never had to choose between electricity and groceries, never had to confront the reality of their financial situation, because I was quietly keeping them afloat. I thought I was protecting my daughter and grandson, but I was actually helping a dangerous man destroy their lives in slow motion. That evening, I made a decision that felt like swallowing broken glass. I logged into my online banking and canceled all the automatic payments I'd been making to their creditors. No more electric bills, no more water bills, no more car payments or grocery store credits. If Brad wanted to keep his secrets, he'd have to find another way to manage the consequences of his gambling and unemployment. Within days, the results would speak for themselves. And then Sarah would finally understand what kind of man she'd married. My 67th birthday fell on a cold February evening, the kind of night when Denver's winter wind cuts through your coat like a knife. Sarah had planned what she called a small family celebration, just the four of us around their dining room table, with a homemade cake and a few simple gifts. I'd spent the afternoon preparing my own gifts for the family, hoping this might represent a turning point in our relationship. For Sarah, I'd bought a spa-day package at a nice resort outside the city, something she could use to relax and escape the stress I knew she was carrying. For Brad and Tommy, I'd purchased tickets to a Colorado Rockies game in the spring, thinking father and son could bond over baseball while giving me a chance to show Brad I supported his relationship with Tommy. The evening started pleasantly enough. Sarah had made pot roast, my favorite meal, and decorated the dining room with simple birthday streamers. Tommy proudly presented me with a drawing he'd made at school, showing our family as stick figures standing in front of a house, with "Happy Birthday, Grandpa" written in careful first-grade letters across the top. "This is beautiful, Tommy," I said, genuinely moved by his effort. "I'm going to frame this and hang it in my room." "Really?" His eyes lit up with 6-year-old excitement. "Dad said it was just scribbles, but I worked really hard on it." I glanced at Brad, who was opening a beer at the counter. His comment about Tommy's artwork bothered me, but I decided not to address it directly. Instead, I focused on making Tommy feel proud of his gift. We sat down to dinner, and Sarah brought out her grandmother's good china, the delicate plates with tiny roses around the edges that had been passed down through 3 generations. I appreciated the gesture, understanding that she was trying to make the evening special despite the underlying tensions in the household. That's when the trouble started. I'd made coffee earlier and had used one of the matching cups from the china set, not thinking anything of it. The cup was sitting by my place at the table, empty and clean, when Brad noticed it. "Why are you using the good china?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that made Sarah look up from serving the pot roast. "I'm sorry," I said, confused by his tone. "I made coffee earlier and just grabbed the first cup I saw. I didn't realize it was special." "Those cups belong to Sarah's grandmother," Brad said, his voice getting louder. "They're not supposed to be used for everyday things like coffee." "Brad," Sarah intervened gently, "it's fine, they're just cups, and it's Dad's birthday." "No, it's not fine," Brad continued, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking before dinner, which explained his belligerent mood. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Sarah. He acts like he owns this place, using whatever he wants, doing whatever he pleases, without asking permission or showing any respect for our belongings." I tried to diffuse the situation. "You're absolutely right, Brad. I should have asked before using the china. I'll be more careful in the future." But my attempt at peace only seemed to inflame him further. "More careful? How about more respectful? You've been living in our house for 6 months, eating our food, using our utilities, taking up our space, and acting like you're entitled to treat everything here like your own personal property. Dad's been helping with expenses, Sarah said quietly, though I could see confusion in her eyes about how exactly I'd been helping. Helping? Brad laughed harshly. What help? He doesn't pay rent. He doesn't buy groceries. He just sits around all day, getting in our way and making suggestions nobody asked for. The unfairness of his accusation stung, especially knowing that I'd been secretly paying most of their bills for months. But I couldn't defend myself without revealing what I'd been doing, and I sensed this confrontation was about much more than china cups or household expenses. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, I know this situation isn't ideal for anyone. I'm working on finding my own place, and I appreciate you both letting me stay here while I get back on my feet. Get back on your feet? Brad's voice rose to a near shout. You're 67 years old, Donte. You lost your house because you couldn't manage your own finances. You're living off your daughter like some kind of deadbeat, and now you want us to believe you're going to magically become independent again? His words cut deep because they echoed fears I'd been carrying since Margaret died. The fear that I was becoming a burden, the fear that my best years were behind me, the fear that I really was useless, just taking up space in a world that had moved on without me. That's enough, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. I could see she was torn between defending me and avoiding a bigger fight with her husband. No, it's not enough, Brad continued, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. I'm tired of pretending this arrangement is working. You're useless, Donte. Completely useless. You had your chance to build a life, and you failed. Now you're here, dragging us down with you, making us responsible for your mistakes. That's when Tommy started crying. The little boy who'd been so proud of his birthday drawing just minutes earlier was now scared and confused, watching the adults in his life tear each other apart. His small shoulders shook with sobs as he looked back and forth between his father and grandfather, not understanding why the evening had turned so ugly. Instead of stopping his tirade to comfort his son, Brad seemed energized by the child's distress. He pointed at Tommy and said to me, "Look what you've done. You've upset my son with your selfishness and your refusal to accept reality." "Brad, please," Sarah whispered, reaching for Tommy, but the damage was already done. "You have no place in our home anymore," Brad declared, his words carrying the finality of a judge's sentence. "Pack your things and get out, tonight." The room fell silent except for Tommy's continued crying. Sarah sat frozen, her face pale with shock. I looked at my daughter, hoping she would speak up, would defend me, would tell her husband he was wrong to throw me out like garbage on my birthday. But she said nothing. The silence stretched on, confirming what Brad had said more powerfully than any words could have. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. "I'll pack my things," I said quietly. As I moved toward the stairs, I heard Brad say to Tommy, his voice suddenly gentle and paternal, "It's okay, buddy. Your grandfather is leaving because he doesn't really belong here anyway. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect their families." Those words followed me up the stairs and into my basement room, where I began putting my life into suitcases while my grandson's confused sobs echoed through the house above me. 20 minutes later, I stood on the sidewalk in front of Sarah's house, my 2 suitcases at my feet, and my entire life compressed into portable containers that fit in the trunk of my aging Honda Civic. The February wind cut through my coat, and the streetlights cast long shadows that made the suburban neighborhood look foreign and unwelcoming. As I loaded my belongings into the car, I could see movement behind the curtains of the living room window. Sarah's silhouette passed back and forth, and I imagined her trying to comfort Tommy while processing what had just happened. Part of me hoped she might come outside, might tell me to wait, might stand up to Brad and invite me back inside. But the front door remained closed, and after a few minutes, the curtains stopped moving. I drove through Denver's quiet streets, passing closed shops and empty parking lots, with no clear destination in mind. Most hotels would be expensive for a long-term stay, and I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what came next. Eventually, I found myself at the Sunrise Motor Lodge, a modest establishment downtown that advertised weekly rates on a faded sign. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, took my cash payment for 7 days and handed me a key to room 12. The room was small and dated, with thin carpeting that had seen better decades and an air conditioning unit that hummed constantly, even in the winter. But it was clean and private, and most importantly, it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had happened. In the span of half an hour, I'd gone from being a family member celebrating a birthday to being a homeless man starting over at 67. Brad's words echoed in my memory, especially his assessment of my worth. Useless, deadbeat, burden. The worst part was wondering if he might be right. I'd lost my house to medical debt, something that happened to thousands of Americans every year but still felt like a personal failure. I'd been living with my daughter's family for 6 months, unable to afford my own apartment. I was surviving on my deceased wife's insurance money instead of earning a living wage. Maybe I really was a man whose best years were behind him, whose contribution to the world had ended when Margaret died. But as I unpacked my suitcases, my fingers found something unexpected tucked into the pages of my Bible. An envelope, yellowed with age, with my name written in Margaret's graceful handwriting. I stared at it for several moments, confused about how it had gotten there, and when Margaret might have written it. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded 2 pages of letter paper, covered in the flowing script I'd watched Margaret use for 34 years of marriage. "My dearest Donte," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost and wondering about your purpose. I'm writing this during one of my good days, when the cancer treatments are working and I can think clearly about what I want to tell you." I had to stop reading and wipe my eyes, hearing Margaret's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me in the motel room. "You've spent so many years taking care of me and Sarah that I worry you've forgotten how to take care of yourself. You've been the strongest man I've ever known, not because you're loud or demanding, but because you're steady and reliable and good. When Sarah was 13 and angry at the world for taking her mother away too soon, you didn't give up on her. You learned how to braid her hair and help with her homework and listen to her cry about boys who didn't appreciate her." The letter continued for 2 pages, reminding me of moments I'd forgotten and strengths I'd stopped recognizing in myself. Margaret wrote about the pride she felt watching me raise our daughter alone, about the sacrifices I'd made without complaint, about the quiet dignity I'd shown in facing life's challenges. But the most important paragraph came near the end. "If someone ever tells you that you're useless or worthless, remember that they're speaking from their own fear and inadequacy. A man who raised a daughter to be kind and strong, who worked 40 years to provide for his family, who showed love through action rather than words, is never useless. Sometimes love requires making difficult decisions that other people won't understand. Sometimes protecting the people we care about means accepting temporary pain for the sake of long-term healing." As I finished reading, something shifted inside me. The despair and self-doubt that had consumed me for the past few hours began transforming into something else. Clarity, determination, understanding. Margaret was right. I had been accepting Brad's abuse and enabling his destructive behavior because I was afraid of losing my relationship with Sarah and Tommy. But true love sometimes required taking stands that seemed harsh in the moment, but were necessary for protecting family in the long run. I thought about the gambling receipts I'd found in Brad's car, the evidence of his theft from the auto parts store, the dangerous people he might owe money to, the lies he was telling Sarah every day, my secret payments that were helping him hide his addiction and criminal behavior from the woman I'd raised to be strong and smart and capable of making good decisions. Sarah deserved to know the truth about the man she'd married. Tommy deserved to grow up in a household built on honesty rather than deception. And I deserved to be treated with respect, not thrown out like garbage by a man who was destroying my family from the inside. I opened my laptop and began researching Brad's gambling debts and employment history, using the banking connections I'd built over 40 years in the loan business. If Brad wanted to play games with my family's future, he was about to discover that a supposedly useless old man still had some moves left. Over the next 3 days, I conducted the most thorough investigation of my life, using skills I'd developed during 4 decades as a loan officer to uncover the full scope of Brad's deception and criminal behavior. What I found was worse than I'd imagined, a web of lies and illegal activity that threatened not just Sarah's financial future, but her physical safety and professional reputation. My first call was to my former colleague Janet, who worked in the fraud detection department of our old bank. I explained that I was investigating potential financial crimes involving my family and needed advice on tracking paper trails. Janet, who'd worked with me for 15 years and trusted my judgment, agreed to help me navigate the legal aspects of my investigation. "Be very careful, Donte," she warned me. If you're dealing with gambling debts and theft, you could be looking at organized crime connections. Don't do anything that puts you or your family at risk. Her warning proved prophetic when I called the auto parts store and spoke with Helen, the manager who'd confirmed Brad's termination. After some gentle questioning, she revealed details that chilled me to the bone. The theft wasn't just a few missing items, Helen explained, her voice low and nervous. Brad was part of a larger operation, stealing high-end parts and selling them to an underground network. We found out because one of our suppliers noticed their serial numbers showing up in illegal sales. The police are involved, and they're building a case against several people, including Brad. Has he been arrested? I asked. Not yet, but there's a warrant being prepared. The detective handling the case said they're trying to get Brad to cooperate and identify the other people involved. If he doesn't, he's looking at serious prison time for grand theft. I thanked Helen and immediately called my lawyer friend Robert, a criminal defense attorney who'd handled several cases for banking clients over the years. I explained the situation and asked for his assessment of Brad's legal exposure. If he's involved in organized retail theft, especially automotive parts, he could be facing federal charges, Robert said grimly. The prison sentence could be anywhere from 3 to 7 years, depending on the total value of stolen merchandise and his level of cooperation with investigators. But the gambling situation was even more dangerous than the theft charges. Using my banking connections, I traced Brad's casino visits and online betting activities. The pattern that emerged showed a man spiraling deeper into addiction and debt over the past 8 months, with losses escalating dramatically after I'd moved in with their family. The most alarming discovery came when I contacted Eddie, a former bank customer who'd worked in casino security before retiring. I asked him to help me identify the underground poker operations Brad had been frequenting, based on the receipts I'd found. Those places you're talking about aren't just illegal gambling, Eddie told me during our meeting at a downtown coffee shop. They're connected to some very dangerous people, the kind who don't negotiate payment plans or accept excuses. If your son-in-law owes them serious money, your family could be in physical danger. Eddie's investigation confirmed my worst fears. Brad owed approximately $15,000 to people who operated outside the law, who collected debts through intimidation and violence. The poker games he'd been attending were run by criminals who had no hesitation about threatening family members to ensure payment. These guys don't care about his excuses or his family situation, Eddie explained. They'll come to his house, threaten his wife and kid, whatever it takes to get their money. And if he can't pay, they'll make an example of him to send a message to other debtors. As I sat in my motel room that evening, reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered, the full scope of Brad's betrayal became clear. He'd been gambling away his family's security while accepting my secret financial support, using my help to hide his addiction and theft from Sarah. He'd endangered my daughter and grandson by involving them with dangerous criminals, all while treating me like a worthless burden he couldn't wait to eliminate. But I'd also discovered something else during my investigation. My own power in the situation was much greater than Brad realized. My 40 years in banking had given me contacts throughout Denver's financial community. I knew loan officers, insurance agents, real estate professionals, and law enforcement personnel. More importantly, I'd built relationships with people who respected my integrity and would believe my word over that of a known gambler and thief. The anonymous payments I'd been making to support Sarah's household had created a paper trail that proved my financial contribution to their stability. Without my help, they would have lost their utilities, their cars, and possibly their home months ago. Brad's gambling had been enabled by my generosity, but it had also been documented by my bank records. Most significantly, I discovered that Sarah's inheritance from her grandmother, money that was supposed to be in a college fund for Tommy, had been stolen by Brad to cover gambling losses. He'd forged her signature on withdrawal slips and had transferred nearly $12,000 from Tommy's education fund to pay debts and finance more gambling. This wasn't just betrayal of trust. It was identity theft and embezzlement of funds meant for my grandson's future. With the right legal strategy, I could not only expose Brad's crimes, but also ensure that Sarah and Tommy were protected from the dangerous people he'd involved in their lives. The next morning, I made the decision that would change everything. I stopped all the anonymous payments that had been keeping their household afloat. No more electric bills, no more water bills, no more car payments. If Brad wanted to maintain his deception, he'd have to do it without my financial support. Within 48 hours, their world would start collapsing, and Sarah would finally be forced to confront the truth about the man she'd married. 3 days after I stopped the anonymous payments, Sarah's carefully constructed world began falling apart. The first sign of trouble came when their electricity was shut off for non-payment, something that had never happened during the 6 months I'd been living with them. Sarah called the utility company in confusion, certain there had been a mistake, only to learn that their account was 3 months behind, despite her belief that Brad had been keeping up with the bills. The next day, their water was disconnected. Then their car was nearly repossessed when the finance company couldn't reach them about overdue payments. Sarah found herself dealing with a cascade of financial emergencies that made no sense based on what Brad had told her about their financial situation. I knew exactly when she would call me. It happened on Thursday evening, as I sat in my motel room reviewing the evidence I'd gathered about Brad's criminal activities. My phone rang, and Sarah's voice was shaky with panic and confusion. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," she said without preamble. "Have you been helping us with bills, anonymous payments, or something like that?" For a moment, I considered lying, protecting Brad's secrets the way I'd been doing for months. But Margaret's letter had reminded me that sometimes love required difficult honesty rather than comfortable deception. "Yes," I said simply. "I've been paying your utilities and some other expenses since I moved in with you." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "How much, Dad?" "About $2,000 a month for the past 6 months. Another long silence. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, she asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew Brad's pride wouldn't allow him to accept help directly, and because I wanted to protect you and Tommy from worrying about money." "Protect me from what?" Her voice was getting stronger, more demanding. "What aren't you telling me?" That's when I made the decision that had been building for days. "Sarah, we need to meet somewhere neutral, away from your house, where we can talk safely. There are things you need to know about Brad that could put you and Tommy in danger." We agreed to meet at a family restaurant near her workplace, a place where we could talk privately without risking Brad overhearing our conversation. I spent the next hour organizing the evidence I'd gathered. Bank records, casino receipts, documentation of Brad's theft charges, and information about the dangerous people he owed money to. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant early and chose a corner booth where we could speak without being overheard. When Sarah walked in, I was shocked by her appearance. She looked exhausted and frightened, her usual confidence replaced by the expression of someone whose world was crumbling around her. "I confronted Brad about the bills," she said as soon as she sat down. "He admitted he lost his job, but he says it was just a layoff and he's been looking for new work. He claims the money problems are temporary and that he didn't want to worry me." I opened my folder and placed the first document in front of her, the termination notice from the auto parts store, clearly stating that Brad had been fired for theft of inventory. "It wasn't a layoff, Sarah. He was fired for stealing, and there are criminal charges being prepared against him." Her face went white as she read the document. "This has to be a mistake. Brad wouldn't steal anything." I placed the gambling receipts on the table, dozens of them showing thousands of dollars lost at casinos and illegal poker games over the past 8 months. "He's been gambling away your money while I've been secretly paying your bills. Without my help, you would have lost your house months ago." Sarah stared at the receipts, her hands trembling as she picked them up one by one. I could see her trying to reconcile the evidence with the man she thought she knew, the father of her child and partner she'd trusted with their future. "There's more," I said gently, placing the bank statements in front of her. "He's stolen money from Tommy's college fund. Nearly $12,000, taken without your knowledge or permission." The sound Sarah made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "How is that possible? I never signed anything." "He forged your signature. It's identity theft and embezzlement, Sarah. Serious crimes that could send him to prison for years." But the worst revelation was still to come. I placed Eddie's report about the underground gambling operations on the table, explaining the dangerous people Brad owed money to and the threats they posed to her and Tommy's safety. "These aren't legal gambling debts," I explained. "He owes $15,000 to criminals who collect through intimidation and violence. They could come to your house, threaten Tommy, hurt you to get their money." Sarah's composure finally broke completely. She put her head in her hands and cried with the deep, wrenching sobs of someone whose entire life had just been revealed as a lie. I wanted to comfort her, to reach across the table and hold her hand the way I'd done when she was a child, dealing with problems beyond her understanding. But I knew this pain was necessary. She needed to understand the full scope of the danger Brad had brought into their lives before she could make informed decisions about protecting herself and Tommy. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but determined. "What do I do, Dad? How do I protect my son from this mess?" That's when Brad arrived at the restaurant. I saw him through the window, his face dark with anger as he approached our table. Sarah had told him we were meeting to discuss family matters, but she obviously hadn't expected him to show up uninvited. "What the hell is this?" Brad demanded as he slid into the booth next to Sarah, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Some kind of intervention?" "Brad, we need to talk about the bills and the job situation," Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. "Dad's been helping us financially, and I need to understand exactly what's been happening with our money. Your father's been spying on me, going through my personal things, violating my privacy." Brad shot back, glaring at me across the table. "This is exactly the kind of interference I was talking about. He can't mind his own business." I placed the evidence methodically in front of him. The termination notice, the gambling receipts, the bank statements showing the stolen college fund money. "This is your business affecting my daughter and grandson," I said calmly. "Sarah deserves to know that you've been lying to her about losing your job, gambling away their money, and stealing from Tommy's education fund." Brad's face went from angry to panicked as he realized the scope of what I'd discovered. He tried to grab the documents, but Sarah stopped him. "Don't touch those," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "I want to see everything." For the next 20 minutes, Brad alternated between denials, excuses, and accusations. He claimed the gambling was a temporary problem he was getting under control. He said the job loss was a misunderstanding that would be resolved. He accused me of manipulating the evidence to turn Sarah against him. But when I showed Sarah the documentation of the dangerous people he owed money to, Brad's excuses stopped working. "You put our son at risk," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "You gambled away his college money and involved us with criminals who could hurt him." The restaurant had grown quiet around us, other diners sensing the intensity of our conversation and giving us space. Brad looked cornered, desperate, like a man whose carefully constructed lies had finally caught up with him. That's when I made the offer that would determine all our futures. "You have two choices, Brad," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years making difficult financial decisions. "You can turn yourself in to the police, enter gambling addiction treatment, and begin working to make restitution for what you've stolen. Or I'll press charges for identity theft and embezzlement, and you'll face those consequences without any cooperation from this family." "Either way," Sarah added, her transformation into a strong, decisive woman making me proud, "you're not coming home tonight. Tommy and I need to be safe while you figure out how to fix the mess you've created." Brad looked back and forth between us, realizing that his ability to manipulate and control the situation had ended. The man who'd called me useless and thrown me out of their house was now facing the consequences of underestimating the supposedly worthless old man he'd tried to eliminate. 6 months later, I sit in my own apartment, a comfortable one-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood just 15 minutes from Sarah's house. It's small but perfect for my needs, with a view of the mountains and enough space for the furniture I've slowly been accumulating. Most importantly, it's mine, paid for with dignity and independence rather than charity or obligation. Brad pled guilty to theft charges and identity fraud, accepting a plea deal that gave him 2 years of probation instead of prison time in exchange for his cooperation with police in dismantling the retail theft ring. He's been attending court-ordered gambling addiction counseling and working at a supervised job to pay restitution for the money he stole from Tommy's college fund. The divorce proceedings are moving forward amicably, with Sarah focused on protecting Tommy while giving Brad the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his son if he can prove his commitment to recovery. Sarah visits me every Sunday now, usually bringing Tommy for lunch and an afternoon of stories and games. These visits feel different from the tense months when I lived with them. There's mutual respect now, a recognition that I'm not a burden to be managed but a capable man who chose to help his family during a difficult time. Sarah has learned to see me not as someone who needs taking care of, but as someone whose wisdom and experience are valuable resources for navigating life's challenges. Tommy has flourished in the more honest environment Sarah has created. He's doing well in school, excelling in reading, and developing a love for science that reminds me of Sarah at his age. He talks openly about his father's problems now, understanding in age-appropriate terms that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and need help to fix them. Most importantly, he feels secure and loved, protected by his mother's strength and his grandfather's steady presence. The most surprising development has been my relationship with Brad himself. He's asked to meet with me twice during his recovery process, conversations that were difficult but ultimately healing for both of us. The addiction counseling has helped him understand that his resentment toward me was really shame about his own failures as a provider and protector. He's apologized sincerely for the cruel things he said and the way he treated me during those final months. I was so angry at myself for messing up that I took it out on the one person who was actually keeping my family together, he told me during our second meeting. You were doing everything I should have been doing, and instead of being grateful, I convinced myself you were the problem. I've learned important lessons, too, about the difference between helping and enabling, about standing up for respect even when it costs relationships temporarily. Margaret's letter was right when she said that love sometimes requires making difficult decisions that other people won't understand initially. By refusing to accept mistreatment and protecting Sarah from Brad's lies, I proved my worth in the most meaningful way possible. The financial investigation I conducted led to my discovering a new purpose in retirement. I've begun volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helps seniors avoid financial scams and family exploitation. My banking background and recent experience with family financial abuse make me uniquely qualified to help other older adults recognize when they're being taken advantage of and develop strategies to protect themselves. Last week, Tommy helped me change the oil in my car in the apartment complex parking lot, his small hands carefully holding the wrench while I guided him through each step of the process. As we worked together, he asked me about growing older and whether people really become useless when they get old. Your value as a person doesn't come from how much money you make or whether you need help sometimes, I told him, watching his serious expression as he absorbed this lesson. It comes from your character, your kindness, and the love you show other people. Some of the most valuable people in the world are the ones working quietly behind the scenes, holding everything together while other people take credit. He nodded thoughtfully, then asked, like how you were secretly paying our bills when Dad was being mean to you. Sometimes the most important work we do is the work nobody else sees, I said, and sometimes standing up for what's right means accepting temporary pain for the sake of long-term healing. As we finished the oil change and cleaned our tools, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible birthday evening when Brad threw me out of their house. The man who called me useless had learned that respect must be earned through character and action, not demanded through force or cruelty. Age and temporary dependence don't diminish a person's value or wisdom. They often reveal strengths that younger people haven't yet developed. Most importantly, I learned that family relationships built on honesty and mutual respect are worth fighting for, even when that fight requires difficult conversations and temporary separation. The quiet strength that comes from decades of experience, the wisdom earned through surviving life's challenges, and the love that motivates protective action are never useless, regardless of what cruel words might suggest in moments of anger and fear. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love, even when they couldn't understand your actions at the time? Sometimes, the people who seem most vulnerable are actually the ones with the strength and wisdom to save everyone else. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about family challenges and standing up for what's right, even when it costs us something precious. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own experiences with family struggles, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in difficult times. Share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by their age or circumstances, but by their character and the love they show others. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your value as a person never decreases, no matter what challenges life brings your way. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought quietly, with dignity and determination, by people others have underestimated.